Is the Jazz's best case scenario at pick number 5 also the most likely to happen? Find out next on Locked On Jazz.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin. I'm excited to be back with you guys, filling in for David Locke on Locked On Jazz. It's been a while. I missed you guys. I was talking about the Wizards draft pick when I wanted to talk about the Jazz. But as some of you guys may know, I'm a lifelong Jazz fan who's a credentialed NBA draft analyst for Locked On NBA Big Board, attendee of the 2023 and 2024 NBA Combine, Jazz broadcast assistant and statistician for the past 4 seasons, lover of college hoops. So don't expect all the geeky numbers of usual to be gone, but I'll bring a unique perspective as a diehard college hoops fan, NBA draft analyst, and a Jazz employee, and someone to make you as knowledgeable as possible about your Utah Jazz as we head to the NBA draft in what is a big year for the Utah Jazz to get it right. Thanks for making Locked On Jazz your first listen each and every day. And remember, Locked On Jazz is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube at Locked On Jazz, where the best way to help us grow is to comment anything below. And today's question is, what do you make of Tre Johnson's ceiling? By the way, this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. And today I'm going to tell you guys why I think Tre Johnson becoming a Jazzman at pick 5 is the best case scenario. Break down Tre Johnson's game in detail. I'll give you guys a lofty comparison for his game that I don't think is too crazy, but it's a popular player. Let's just put it that way. And then I'll break down why it's the most likely outcome in the draft and why I'd take Tre Johnson over Ace Bailey. That's all ahead on Locked On Jazz. So let's dive right in. Tre Johnson's a stud. Like, let's just break it down right there. I think if I were the Jazz and the Jazz had pick 3, and we know there's rumors the Jazz could be moving up to pick 3 with the trade with Philly. Who knows what's going to happen? But if the Jazz did end up with pick 3 and Ace Bailey and Tre Johnson are both on the board, assuming that Cooper Flagg and Dylan Harper go 1 and 2, I would take Tre Johnson over Ace Bailey. We'll dive into that a little bit later, but I just want to put that as the overarching statement. So I think you would be taking him at 5 and sprinting to the podium. I think that's a home run for the Utah Jazz. He's number 3 on my board, so I'm starting there. Tre Johnson, for being a 5-star prospect all of his life, has seemed overlooked in this class. And in my mind, he's the most natural scorer in the class and has been for years, whereas Ace Bailey is taller by a little, not by as much as the rumors said. He was supposed to be 6'10". He came out at 6'8". I don't really care that much. But Tre Johnson's not small. Like, he's not a diminutive guard. And Ace Bailey is taller, and he came onto the scene later, so many people think there's more untapped potential. Maybe there is, but I tend to like the idea of Tre Johnson's been that dude, been the scorer for a long time. Tre Johnson has been a 5-star forever, and yet VJ Edgecombe and Ace Bailey and guys like that have been drawing so much more attention the entire draft process. Tre Johnson's a quick, high-jumping guard who's the best shooter who will go in the first round. I want to say the best shooter will go in the first round because Kobe Bryant is the best shooter in the draft class. But other than Kobe Bryant, Tre Johnson's the best shooter in the class. And he has true creation ability and demonstrates better vision than the numbers would indicate. Yes, he doesn't have many assists, but if you watch Texas play, there's not many players to pass to who can shoot. And there's also very little spacing on that basketball court. So that's 2 things. Now, many would say he's a 2-guard, but he played with the ball in his hand a ton. So I think that dispels the notion of him being a 2-guard only and being compared to the likes of Lou Williams or Jamal Crawford. Like, I think he's more of a point guard than many of these guys that you say, oh, I wonder if he can become a point guard. So I think Tre Johnson has demonstrated he's one of the best shooters in the class. I have some statistics that'll back this up in just a moment. And he's played point guard. And he scored 20 points per game in the SEC, which had 14 teams make it to the NCAA tournament, which is the most ever. And he scored 20 on a team that he was asked to do everything. Nothing was created for him. He created everything, still scored effectively, and was arguably the most talented player in the entire SEC, which had 14 teams and the national champion and a Final Four team in there. And he more than held his own against all of those teams that were significantly older. And, there's a lot made of Ace Bailey being a young freshman. Same with Cooper Flagg. Same with Dylan Harper. Tre Johnson isn't old either. So I think a lot of this is redirecting the hype because he deserves a lot of hype as opposed to being the afterthought that's now trending because he jumped high at the combine. Like, I don't care that he had a big vertical, but I do think it helps when you compare him with VJ Edgecombe, who everyone says is the better athlete. And I agree, VJ Edgecombe's a more athletic player when you watch the film. But Tre Johnson numerically tested just as well and is a far better basketball player to me. So I would far rather have him than VJ Edgecombe. We'll talk about VJ Edgecombe a little bit as well. But for those of you who are numerically inclined and want more than just, hey, this guy scored a ton, he did so by himself without much creation. He played point guard and is a big guard. And so you can outrun the nightmares of having Mike Conley or a small guard in the backcourt. We can outrun that. Tre Johnson passes all that. But here are some numbers that may have you guys salivating by the end of it. He was 91st percentile shooting off the ball. What that means is when he comes off a screen away from the ball and he has passed the ball, because he brings it up, he passes to someone else and he comes flying off a screen, he shot 91st percentile, which means he's making a ton of threes. That's probably around 50% from three. So let me dive deeper in that. That's like Devin Booker off of curls at Kentucky, except those were 15-footers on a team that was 38-0. Tre Johnson's the only dude on the team. He's the top of the scouting report, and everyone's guarding him. And going to his left as a right-hander, which is more natural. It does sound more difficult, but it is more natural for right-handers to go to their left on catches. He's unreal. He makes 54% of shots going to his left off of screens. And then going to his right's not too shabby now that I look at it. He's shooting 50%. So he's a stupendous shooter going both directions off the ball. So at the very least, you're getting an elite shooter with good traits, a high vertical, someone who can pass the ball as a secondary distributor. And then you look at what he can do as a primary scorer. And this is still off the ball, maybe not the point guard. This is just assuming two guard. He's an 81st percentile transition scorer. And I know David talks about this all the time. He talks about transition and isolation speak to a person's athleticism. Well, he has a 38-inch vertical. So his 38-inch vertical is going nowhere. And he's 81st percentile in transition. He's got tremendous touch. I showed you his shooting. And he's got creativity and skill level to boot right there. And he's 90th percentile in pick and roll, showing me he can play on and off the ball. This is likely saying to me that he can be a point guard with the ball in his hands, play pick and roll, have a true rim runner, have shooting in the corners, which he did not have at Texas. He played with two bigs in the paint and players that were not good shooters anyway. They had a two guard named Kendall Weaver, who was a tremendous athlete, cannot shoot a lick. Tremont Mark is a mid-range shooter. Arthur Kaluma played a burly, bruising four, and Caden Shedrick can't space the floor as the five. And they had backups that were even worse than that. This is a team that was not conducive to NBA-style basketball success, and yet he was still 90th percentile in pick and roll, showing me he can play on the ball. And then if you asked him to play off the ball and take a smaller role and use these pick and rolls, sign me up. I'm all the way there. Now, let's talk about how good of a shooter he is. I told you I think he's the best shooter in the first round because Kobe Bryant is just an otherworldly shooter from Kentucky. He's 84th percentile catch and shoot and 75th percentile on dribble jumpers. You watch him play any game, and you watch how highly he is regarded, and you can tell because the scouting report jumps off and says, oh, let's guard him because he's the only player. Similar to Jeremiah Fears. Jeremiah Fears gets guarded differently than all these other players in the draft, including Cooper Flagg, because they don't have help. Tre Johnson doesn't get open looks, but when he does, he knocks them down. In fact, his guarded catch and shoots are unbelievable as well. And then you watch his dribble jumpers, and this is the mark of a true scorer. He's able to go either way, right hand, left hand, behind a screen, snake a screen, get to the mid-range, shoot the ball, elevate, good shot, bad shot, turnaround jumper, anything you want, and it goes in. Nothing but nylon. The dude has a beautiful jump shot, and he's able to create out of nothing. He can, they say, oh, you miss in a phone booth in football when they talk about someone who's got good jukes. Tre Johnson can elevate and score in a phone booth. Like we talk about Ace Bailey and how his shot making is super alluring because he's able to score difficult and because he's got the skill to do it at this point. If he refines the shot selection, then it's great. Like think about that and the fact that he had to do it because there was no one else on the team to help him. Ace Bailey was playing with Dylan Harper. The rest of his team, terrible. I'm fully aware. And I will talk about that later too. But Ace Bailey didn't show that he could blow by these guys who were crowding him. Tre Johnson showed he could get by people who were crowding him and still was able to score when there was help defenders. And he said, you know what? I guess I'll blow by one guy, step back and shoot a mid-range jump shot. Professional score. The dude can score the ball. And at the flat out minimum, I think you get someone who's able to score 20 points in the NBA. Is it super effective? I remember talking to a Jazz scout a long time ago, and I said, at the minimum, and this is about December probably, and we were sitting in a Toyota club talking about basketball, and I said, Tre Johnson to me is a top 5 guy because at a minimum, he's scoring 20 points. At a minimum, you're getting Kevin Martin. But I think there's another guy that he reminds me of, a guy who's a superstar that everyone talks about now as trying to get the next one of. And I'm going to talk about that coming up, as well as I'm going to tell you guys more about how I think the draft boils down and why he's my favorite option at 5, but also the most likely. I see him as capable of scoring 20 and maybe more capable of scoring 20 than anyone in this class, even more immediately so than Cooper Flagg due to Dallas having other horses, namely Kyrie, Anthony Davis. And he has more playmaking promise to me than VJ Edgecombe, than Ace Bailey, and maybe even more than Jeremiah Fears. Fears does it with burst. I think Tre Johnson could do it with savvy, and just his shot making would draw so many eyes. He'll make the right passes. You watch his film, he makes some good passes, and he uses his burst, not as much as Fears, but he uses his burst to create. The concern for those of you who are going to say, you're not telling us the negative, the concern is that that will have to be answered is how good of an NBA passer is he if he doesn't put a ton of pressure on the rim. And I think he does get to his spots well, and he uses his ability to score to create for others. But that is a fair concern. And here's a stat to back it. Johnson's taken 95 pull-up twos, 99 dribble threes, but only 80 total shots at the rim. So that would say, yeah, he shoots difficult shots as opposed to putting pressure on the rim, and he should get to the free throw line more frequently. But I think he can get to his spots. I think he elevates and scores there, and he has eyes on him at all times. And that matters because he can then pass. There's a guy who's thriving in the NBA right now that does this too, where I don't think he's the most natural passer, but because of his offensive ability to create attention, he's able to create shots for teammates. We're going to talk about him next, but coming up immediately next, I'll explain why I think this is not only the best case scenario for the Jazz, but also maybe the most likely scenario for the Utah Jazz. All that and more ahead on Locked On Jazz. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all the money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. And that's where Monarch Money comes in. It can be your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. And you can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you can stop managing your money and building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan your long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is also smoother than ever, and you can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress of communicating and potentially arguing about that stuff. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money and use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. I also want to tell you guys about my friends at Murdoch. So the Murdoch Chevy is fantastic. You've heard about that plenty. They've been in Utah for over 80 years. That's longevity you can depend upon. Chevy is as American as it gets. When I think of a dirt road and a truck's coming into it, I think of a Chevy right off the bat, and I know you guys do too. There are locations in Woods Cross and Logan, and they both are fantastic. They have a great lineup of Chevy trucks, the Colorado, the Silverado, and the best part is you can go to the website and see the latest deals, and they also have an up-to-date inventory, and that's super important. As someone who just bought a car, I loved having sites tell me that they've got that car in stock so I don't waste my time. Murdoch Chevy does a fantastic job of that. And if you're not in the mood for a truck, but you want an SUV, they have the amazing lineup of SUVs with the Tahoe, the Suburban, the Blazer, the Equinox, and the Trax, and all of them are spotless and super well reported upon. You can look at the Carfax and talk to amazing representatives that have helped our fans at Locked On Jazz forever and ever. So go talk to them and get yourselves a Murdoch Chevy. All righty, welcome back to Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin. Man, I cannot wait to be back talking to you guys about the NBA draft. It's my favorite time of the year. NBA draft, talking Utah Jazz basketball. I love it. And this is a prospect I love. Tre Johnson has my stamp of approval. And I feel very confidently that if he's there at 5, that will be the Jazz's draft pick. I could be wrong, but that's what I believe. So I gave you guys my pitch on what I believe he can be as a player. And that's a great scenario. And who knows if that can be attained. But here is why I prefer Tre over Ace. I know I'm going to get this question, so I'm going to answer it here, and then I'll tell you why I think this question matters, because once you get to 5, only one of them will be there. But why, if Tre is better than Ace, in my opinion, is he going to be there at 5 and Ace will not be? So I believe Tre's better than Ace for the Jazz and in general, but I also think it's more likely for him to be there for the Jazz to take at 5 than Ace Bailey. I prefer Tre because he's a better, more polished scorer at this juncture. I think he's got superior athletic traits, actually, even though Ace is bigger. And most people say, well, you wanted a wing. Like you always talk about, you need to have a wing that's your best player to be in the contention. And like I've talked about Jason Tatum. I've talked about players that you want to build your franchise around. I compared Cooper Flagg to Jason Tatum and said, look, that's the model right now. You want a guy who can play two-way wing. And he's not that exactly. But Ace Bailey is projection. It's projection to say he'll learn burst or wiggle after 19 years of his life without it. He's always been a tremendously skilled shooter, but Tre Johnson's a better shooter objectively and had to do more with the ball. And Tre Johnson, we talked about not putting pressure on the rim. Ace Bailey doesn't put pressure on the rim, and he's bigger. And he's wonderful. And if you can assure 95th percentile or 100th percentile, he could be even better than Flag. And I believe in upside a ton. And that's how I tend to like to draft. I want a franchise altering talent. You'll hear me say that a million times. You've heard it before if you're an everydayer. But Tre Johnson is closer to where he will go right now, which doesn't matter that much for the Jazz because we're not ready to win yet. But he's great at basketball at every level. He's been that way in high school at Link Academy where he played point guard. He was great at Texas. He was better than Ace Bailey was at Rutgers and has taken on different roles. Played the one, played the two, been a scorer, been a distributor. And Tre's the better shooter and creator of shots than Ace. And yet Ace, the main appeal is shooting or shooting potential, or should I say shot making potential. And there it is. This is splitting hairs, but the better shooter and playmaker is Tre Johnson. He has more burst and is a better athlete for his position by measurement. So if both are there at 5, which will not happen, I would be stunned. I would take Tre Johnson because I see more superstar ability in what is there right now, and not making the assumption of learning athleticism, making a tremendous leap as an athlete. Like, skills can get better, but Ace Bailey's not lacking for skill. He'll shoot better than he did in college. I almost guarantee you that. But I don't think you can teach athleticism. And Ace has never been super twitchy. And if you're asking him to become twitchy and have an amazing handle, I think the handle is more likely to happen than him becoming a twitchy athlete. Ace has to learn to become the star that we all expect him to be, the handle and athleticism to become that two-way star. Because he's a secondary rim protector is the appeal defensively, not like lockdown on the wing. And then his scoring is all in a phone booth. It's like Carmelo jab step type game and tough shot making. Now, why is it not only the best case, because the Jazz would be getting a guy at 3 that I would take at 3 in Tre Johnson, but also the most likely case if I feel that strongly that Ace is actually not as good as Tre Johnson. I think it's unlikely that Sixers draft Tre Johnson. Like, that's just the way I feel. Maybe I'm wrong. But they have Jared McCain, who may have been the rookie of the year if we finished out the season. And then they have Tyrese Maxey. Tyrese Maxey is 6'2". Jared McCain's 6'1". So if they share minutes at all, that means Tre Johnson likely doesn't factor into the lineup because they have Paul George already. They have Joel Embiid. And you say, okay, well, it could work, but no, he's not a 3. That's not what he's going to be. So then you say, okay, he could play off the bench. That's fine. He can play off the bench, but you don't draft a guy at number 3 overall on a win-now team. The 76ers are not the usual rebuilding team where you take the best player available and you say, yeah, we're going to throw him in. We're going to have a ton of touches and see what happens. No, the guy who has the ball in his hands is Joel Embiid. Like, that's their number 1 option offensively. The number 2 option, and the guy who will bring the ball up the floor the most frequently, is Tyrese Maxey. Now, you wouldn't have Jared McCain be an obstacle. If you feel that strongly in Tre Johnson over Ace Bailey, you wouldn't have Jared McCain be an obstacle. But the other obstacle would be the third most likely person to touch the ball is Paul George. And Paul George can play the 2 or the 3. And you're not going to have Tre Johnson hold it over to Paul George. And I know Paul George is the brunt of a ton of jokes, but he's still an effective basketball player. He had a bad year. He'll likely get better and regress to the mean, or should I say progress to the mean. And then here's the other thing about Paul George. Paul George is the guy that everyone looks up to. Brandon Miller, who is very similar to Ace Bailey in characteristics, talked about Paul George being his favorite player, and he describes him as close to the GOAT because he's so versatile. He plays 2 ways. He's long, he's shifty, and all this. So who better to mentor a guy that, if you're trying to play win now, fits in and can knock down open shots at a position of need for the 76ers, but also teach that guy to be a vital piece to their future in Paul George mentoring Ace Bailey. So that's what I think happens. I think Ace Bailey goes number 3. I know that Daryl Morey, there's been rumors that Bill Simmons spat out that Daryl Morey wants an athlete, and it could be VJ Edgecombe. Maybe they go big and go common mall watch. Either way, that's good for the Jazz. I just don't see Tre Johnson being the pick. Now you go to Charlotte. Charlotte's a really interesting spot because I don't think that they take Ace Bailey after taking Brandon Miller and LaMelo Ball. I think they want dynamic athleticism. You could have Tre Johnson. There are a lot of reports that say VJ Edgecombe, and I'd be delighted if they took VJ Edgecombe, particularly if Ace was still on the board and Tre was still on the board, because the Jazz would then get a pick of one of those 2. However, I think Ace is gone at 3, and at 4, it's going to be Tre Johnson, VJ Edgecombe, or Jeremiah Fears. There's a world where Common Malawatch enters that discussion because Mark Williams is injury prone. You could get some pennies on the dollar for it, and you get a guy who's similar. I don't see that happening. I don't see the Con Knipple happening. Jeremiah Fears is entering top 5 discussions, and when there's smoke, there's a fire usually. I've been hearing that the Nets who are picking 8th. They're trying to trade up because they really want Jeremiah Fears. Jeremiah Fears likely not going to get to 8. I've seen it. Some teams even have him as 2, and he's going to go no lower than 5 is what I've been hearing. So the Jazz could factor into the Jeremiah Fears sweepstakes, but there's a world that he goes for. There's a world VJ goes for. And the way that the Hornets are constructed, yes, I think Tre Johnson would be good on the Hornets playing alongside LaMelo Ball and using his shooting ability. But I think Tre Johnson, the teams that really would believe in him as a top 5 pick are the teams that are going to give him the ball. And if you have LaMelo Ball, I don't see the ball being put into Tre Johnson's hands to succeed. So in my heart of hearts, I think Tre Johnson will be available at pick number 5. That's just the way I feel. I've seen tons of rumors. I don't know exactly what's going to happen. This is maybe wishful thinking, but I really do think from the intel I hear and just what I think of these players, and I can only tell you what I think of the players, but what I think of the players would indicate that he's a top 5 pick guaranteed. And I think if Jeremiah Fears leapfrogs him, then they're making a slight mistake. And I like Jeremiah Fears. He's number 5 on my board. I think VJ Edgecombe's not as good as Tre Johnson, but perhaps fits better at the Hornets. And the Hornets do have a player that can be a franchise-altering talent with the ball in his hands, and therefore maybe are less inclined to take a guy like Tre Johnson, who the main appeal to taking him in top 5 is being franchise-altering talent, and you'd want the ball in his hands. So that's my pitch as to why he is not only the best case scenario for the Jazz, but also the most likely pick at number 5. Coming up next, I will give my pitch for who I think Tre Johnson can be. It's not a 1-to-1, but I think you guys will like where I'm going with this. It is a guy named Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, the reigning MVP. So NBA, let me tell you guys about that coming up next, and that and more ahead on Locked On Jazz. NBA fans, you know what time it is. Playoff season means more big performances and even bigger rewards. DoorDash is bringing the heat with a slam dunk deal for Dash Pass members during the 2025 NBA playoffs. It's called They Squish, You Score. Anytime a player drops 50 or more points in a playoff game, Dash Pass members score a free 3-piece crispy tenders combo from Wingstop the very next day. Just place an order of $20 or more and use the code Wingstop50 at checkout, and that combo is yours. Crispy, delicious, and totally free. The offer is valid noon to midnight the day after the game. Terms do apply. So imagine being rewarded with free food just because someone went off for 50. Imagine back in the bubble that this was around when Donovan and Jamal Murray were trading 50 pieces. Sign me up. But now you don't have to imagine, it's real. So here's the play. Sign up for Dash Pass to unlock this and more exclusive deals all season long. When any player scores 50 or more in a playoff game, Dash Pass members can grab a free 3-piece crispy tenders combo from Wingstop the next day, and with a new $20+ order and code Wingstop50. That's Dash Pass, your door to more savings, more flavor, and more ways to win. Terms apply. All right, welcome back to Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin. And if you guys listened to right before the break, I gave the teaser away. There's no more cliffhanger. I think Tre Johnson can look similar to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I don't think they do it in the same way, but here's my pitch. And I've said this to scouts I've interacted with, both at the NBA Combine, people I've talked to through sources with Rafael Barlow, who the everydayers have heard a lot of on Locked On Jazz, because David was talking to him about Tre Johnson, about Ace Bailey, about VJ Edgecombe, all these guys. You've heard about these guys. I networked with some people, and I sold them on the vision, so I'll sell it to you here. My comparison for Tre Johnson is SGA, and here's why I believe he can be a star, much like SGA. Everyone says 20 points per game is feasible, but likens him to Cam Thomas or Lou Williams or Jamal Crawford. But the issue with that comparison is it pigeonholes him into being a 2-guard. Like I said, I think he's a better ball handler, and the numbers, the advanced stats, tell you he's very good at pick and roll. So that's what the NBA is today. The best point guards are all excellent pick and roll players. The most dangerous weapon today in basketball was created by Steph Curry and Damian Lillard. It's an off-the-dribble 3. He's excellent at that. He's excellent in the mid-range, but he doesn't need to be in the mid-range. And then if you're to say he's a 2-guard, I'll give David some credit here because I didn't think of this, but I listened because I, too, am an everydayer when I'm not hosting. I think he is closer to Bradley Beal, as David once said here on Locked On Jazz, than the Jamal Crawford or Lou Will. So at least you're getting a guy who can thrive off of curls, score the ball, and in the sense can still create offensively as a secondary secondary facilitator as the primary scorer like Bradley Beal was. So many stars are asked to facilitate and use their shooting gravity to see the floor. What Shai Gilgeous-Alexander does is he uses his driving ability and his ability to create two players on the ball. He creates advantageous situations for the offense because he's got such guile mixed with tremendous burst, and he's able to draw two defenders and dish. He is a two guard by nature. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is a scorer, but he's an excellent attention creator because he uses his guile, his handle, and his scoring savvy to create other players to become an excellent point guard in today's NBA. He was the MVP for a reason. Nikola Jokic is a better basketball player than Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Like, I'm just going to tell you what I think. I also would argue Giannis is probably better than Shai too. But Shai is a top 3, top 5 player in the NBA, so this is no slight at him. And I'm not saying Tre Johnson will be a top 3 or top 5 player in the NBA, though I would be delighted to see that. I think Tre Johnson's scoring acumen is such that he will always be able to score 20 to 25 points a game, and his passing traits are unreal. Like, he's able to see the floor, and his passes to the corner, you watch him and you say, wow, he made the right pass. They just didn't score. So the assist didn't show up. His ability to score from all 3 levels is very good. I mentioned, I think an area of improvement is putting more pressure on the rim. I think if you clear out the paint, instead of having 4 players who can't shoot, you put 2, maybe 2 more that can shoot next to him, preferably 3 more that can shoot next to him. You put him next to a guy like Lauri Markkanen, who takes away a big body away from the paint, and he can drive to that side and have the gravity of a Lauri Markkanen drifting and a Walker Kessler rolling to the rim, and perhaps a shooter in a weak side corner ready to shoot. I think he can finish at the rim just fine. I think he can create and make the right reads just fine. I also think that you can play him alongside a guy like Collier, and Collier push the tempo, and Tre Johnson uses his 81st percentile transitioning finishing, 38-inch vertical, and figures out how to score the basketball in transition like all pros do. He's going to get stronger. He's going to become a better athlete. He's a 6'5" point guard who's able to use his scoring ability, his guile. He shoots 85 to 90% from the free throw line, and I think that'll be his case his entire career. He's going to use his gravity from the three-point line to drive closeouts and put a 4-against-3 options and that's what basketball is right now. It's about math. It's about the ability to create numerical advantages on a basketball court. And I think Tre Johnson does it better than anyone in this class not named Cooper Flagg. The only reason I don't think he's better than Dylan Harper, and I think there is a world where he is better immediately and down the road because he's a better shooter, but the reason he's not better than Dylan Harper is Dylan Harper uses his body better to get to the rim and thus creates more advantages and is a more natural passer of the basketball. But Tre Johnson, I think, is a better scorer at this juncture. And that's how highly I think of Tre Johnson. Tre Johnson, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, neither are true point guards. Both are excellent scorers that see the floor well. And you could look at other 2 guards that you say, okay, this is a 2 guard is really good. So Devin Booker, I was doing a practice broadcast, and the Suns were playing the Grizzlies. Devin Booker had 7.1 point assists per game on the season. And he's a guy who was playing next to Kevin Durant. So Kevin Durant's going to handle a lot of that facilitation. They also had Tyus Jones. And Tyus Jones is an excellent distributor. He's one of like the assist to turnover kings. And a guy like Devin Booker is different in the way that they score than Tre Johnson to me. But if you look at what they did in college, Tre Johnson was the better collegiate basketball player. Devin Booker was the guy I wanted the Jazz to draft instead of Trey Lyles because, man, that guy could really shoot the basketball. And I had no idea he could become as good of a passer, as good of a complete basketball player as he's become. Tre Johnson has shown flashes of so much more, shown he can be an elite movement shooter, an elite shooter off the bounce using screens, an elite shooter from all ranges, and has demonstrated that he has a 38-inch vertical as a good finisher around the rim and is a 90th percentile pick and roll guy. And you watch him play, and it's not just numbers. He substantiates it all in the hardest league in basketball. So that's my pitch. Tre Johnson is an all-star. And when you're drafting in these top 5, yes, the Jazz wanted number 1. We wanted Cooper Flagg. I was dying to get Cooper Flagg. I would have loved Dylan Harper. But at 5, the fact that I think it's possible, maybe likely, it's not a 100% chance. It's not even a 50% chance that he's there at the board. But it's the most likely of all the players we've spoken about and we think highly of that Tre Johnson's available. I think the Jazz fans should be hoping that he is there, and I think should be a sprint to the podium. If Tre Johnson's there at 5, Jazz fans should expect Tre Johnson to be that pick. That's how I feel. I like Jeremiah Fears. We're going to talk about Jeremiah Fears later this week. I think that he's better than VJ Edgecombe. VJ Edgecombe, if he goes in the top 4, should be the best news for the Jazz there is. And we're also going to talk about what if the Jazz make a trade with Philly and have pick 3 and pick 5? What should the strategy be? What about pick 21? All that and ahead all week long. We're going to talk about draft. Send me your thoughts on Twitter. Let me know what you think about Tre Johnson in the comments here on Twitter. If you want anything discussed that I didn't discuss, and I answered a few of you guys about would I have Ace or Tre, I hope this answers it. I'm very available to that. I want to talk to you guys about this. I want this pick to be great, just like you guys do. So thank you guys for listening to Locked On Jazz. It's been fun to be back. So thank you for making Locked On Jazz your first listen today. And for your second listen, check out Locked On NBA Big Board. NBA draft expert Rafael Barlow reacts to every workout, interview, and rumor leading up to the NBA draft. Find Locked On NBA Big Board on YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcast, and learn more about these prospects that the Utah Jazz could be selecting. So thank you guys for listening. I'll be back with you guys tomorrow. Appreciate your support.